Organissima, New York. Your exotic skin, hair, and beauty source, and your one-stop shop for all your natural and organic skin and hair care, featuring authentic organic Moroccan oil and prickly pear seed oil and much more. Bringing you only the best, straight from the source and proudly produced in the USA. So what are you waiting for? Shop today. Organissima, New York. Your beauty is our duty.
Well, welcome back to this great edition of Climb to Your Prime with Dr. Heim. I announced it. We've talked about it a month and a half ago. This is a special day, really special. As you might remember, about a month and a half ago, we had our recurring show, and we had introduced the idea that Dr. Heim will be visiting us in New York, and he is here with his lovely wife, Dr. Caroline Heim. And this is, again, a special edition because we are doing a book launch. And we're going to talk about that book and the content. And it is an important topic. Everybody has a relationship somehow, somewhere. And relationship can be difficult, can be painful. And we want them to work. And today, we're going to talk to the experts about their study and their book and how this book can make a difference in relationships building, relationship maintenance, and all the above. So without any further ado, first things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Hurricane. It's so great to be here in New York City.
It certainly is. Thank you.
Well, listen, I am honored to have you in my presence physically. I mean, we've been doing this, 2.5 years, and literally we've been doing the future and the present kind of concept because I'm usually doing this at night. It's the past for them, it's the future there, and we always have the discussion about how's the future. We can't do that today.
We can't do that today because we're in the present together. That's right.
All right. Well, listen, so resilient relationships. That's two big words. I mean, relationships I introduced, but resilience. Before we get into that, let's talk about the concept of relationships. I mean, everybody has one. I don't care with your parents, with your kids, with your friends, your colleagues, but most importantly, with your intimate, friends or whatever you want to call them these days, there's a lot. So you can be married, you can be significant other, it can be anything. But so let's talk about relationships.
So, Hurricane, a relationship basically is life. Life is lived in and through relationships. In a way, we can track how our life goes through our relationships. We start off in relationship with our parents. Then we have relationships with friends, school peers. Then we find a love relationship. Then we start a family of our own. And at work, it's all relationship. What makes life good or not is the quality of our relationships.
Wow. Well, so let's talk about this. Why is it that people have difficulty with relationships?
Yeah, there are a few things going on, Hurricane. Firstly, it's difficult in life anyway because we all want to be ourselves, yet we all want to be in relationship. So that's a tension right there. Can we be ourselves and in relationship? And that's always been a tension. However, in this wonderful world that we live in at the moment, we want to be ourselves more, and the world encourages us to be ourselves more, which means that relationships sometimes take a back seat when they need a lot more work.
Especially in the world of hyper-individualism.
In hyper-individualism, that's
yes,
right.
When everyone has certain ideas about how they do life, how they want to live life, and then another person comes in the scene, and it's hard to manage and negotiate.
Yeah, so I'll just look at that word hyper-individualism at the moment. Individualism, we know, it means being ourselves. But hyper-individualism is being ourselves in overdrive, on steroids, all the time, which means that relationships tend to fail if we don't put a bit more work into them.
Well, so that's the part that's difficult, right?
That's
put
right.
it to work.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's right. It's work.
It is.
It's work.
It is super work. I mean, anyone who's been out there, I mean, again, we can talk from the moment we're born and we're growing, there's a relationship there. And then it gets, more complicated as we get into the older ages. And here's the thing. Today, there is some crazy statistics
Yeah.
Of divorce or relationships that don't make it.
Yeah.
And you're talking about individualism, and so everybody is looking at the best, what's in it for me. I'm it. This is about me most of the stuff. So there's a relationship here. It may work, it may not work because everybody's pulling, as we say, arm's length in relationship or like whatever transactions are. And that's really difficult because if there is no, I would say, compromise and kind of synergy, we have a problem.
Yeah.
And by the way, guys, you're watching. I have the two Dr. Heims here, and they've been married for a long time. Now, just understand that it is work to be done. I have seen a lot of couples that have been married for 50 and 60 years, believe it or not, and you ask them, and they'll tell you it's not easy. It takes a lot of give and take. This is not something like overnight, we're just going to love each other and it's cool and we're going to make it happen and it's over. Most people, as soon as they get some firewalls, I would call them in life, or some blockades or some problems in life, financial or otherwise, it becomes a destruction. It becomes bad. So doctors, let's talk about that. I mean, mental health is a big piece of this, right? And the good and the bad. When something happens, why is it that people immediately tend to blame each other?
Okay. So let's go back to why we wrote this book in the first place. And that actually has to do with mental health. That one of the big reasons why mental health is not as healthy as it could be these days is because our relationships are just coming down. Relationships are harder to keep together. And if we had better relationships, then our mental health would be better. So that put us on a way of interviewing people to see what they did well, because we tended to know people who'd been together, 40, 50 years in their lives? Mm-hmm. And so we came across this idea that we better find out what they were doing right before they leave this place, all right?
Yeah, absolutely. To capture some of their wisdom, some of their insights, because a lot of people look at what's going wrong in relationships. A lot of any of the couples research looks at, what happened in the divorce and what happened and what went wrong. But we wanted to look at what went right. So take a really positive approach and look at thriving couples and say, okay, what are they doing right? How did they manage to stay together for 40 plus years when a lot of people today can't stay together for 40 days and are quite actually in awe of these couples, which is really wonderful to see in some of the younger couples that we interviewed, some of their questions. So, and say, okay, this is what works. And, can you apply those principles to your life? Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the things that work. That in your, I guess, questioning and the findings, what are some of the key elements or key tools that make a relationship work?
Okay, so we actually need to go back to the original question, Sen. So what we did, we interviewed 1,402 coupled individuals, let me make that clear, coupled individuals worldwide in 52 different countries. And so what we wanted to do is find out how they thrive, but we thought, well, do young people really want to know this, So what we did first is we surveyed 290 younger couples and said, okay, if you could ask people married 40 plus years a question, what would it be? And so we came up with 5 questions, and then we asked the actually 923 coupled individuals that have been married 40 plus years those questions. So that the younger couples' questions were really interesting, and the older couples' responses were really fascinating too. Yeah.
So we created a bit of a dialogue. We had the younger people say, what do you want to know? Because these people have been together more than 40 years. And if they're doing something right, and we believe that they are, then they've got insights that we can pass on.
So were they accepting of those things? I mean, sometimes the younger generation may not be as open to people's experiences because they want to experience themselves.
Yeah. And that in a way is the crux of the matter. Can you actually make a relationship work and be yourself in this hyper-individual age? So this book is basically written for couple therapists, so helping people who want their relationship to last. And it has insights as to how people can do that. And this is the way we did it. As Caroline said, we looked at people who were doing well in their relationship, and we said, okay, so what are the ingredients that make your relationship do well? And I'm going to let Caroline talk about some of those top ingredients, but the idea is if you can get these happening in your relationship, then your relationship, even in this hyper-individual world, can last the distance.
So the secret sauce.
Okay,
secret
okay,
sauce.
all right.
Let's
We're,
go to the sauce.
we're getting there.
There you go. Let's do this.
So yeah, it was really surprising because relationships are very fluid. There's all sorts of different approaches to relationships today. So when we asked the younger couples, what questions would you ask? And it was all anonymous. The number one question the younger couples wanted to know was, what is your secret? How do you do it? How do you stay together that long? That's the first question they asked. The second one was, is the spark still there? And how are you still sexually active, after 60 and when you're old and grey? Some really funny questions there. And the third one was about arguing. How do you stop arguing? The fourth one was really fascinating because it was, don't you get bored? Aren't you bored at 30 years into your marriage? And
Because people want to have fun.
and it was
They wanna
about
have fun.
How do you have? Are you still having fun? And interestingly, in the 450,000 word transcript that we wrote of the interviews, there was so much data there. The word boredom was not used once in the older couples, so it wasn't such an issue. But yeah, so the number one question they wanted to ask, overwhelmingly, and this is great because they did want their relationships to last, was what is the secret? What is the glue? How do you do it?
So this is a big deal, right? Because boredom, right? Most people think that, when it's park and it's brand new and fresh, it's exciting. But as time goes on, it gets really just monotonous. It's just a regular life, hey, hi, how you doing? I mean, we have jokes about those and you see them in movies, or even on the social media today where, they show you year one excitement, year two, year three, pajamas, whatever, and everybody's, and those are funny things, but it's reality, right? People
It's
sometimes
real.
tend to get to that, it's all good, nothing is the same. But you want to keep somewhere in there that spark. Your vacation, you do certain things together,
Yeah.
you hang out. Date night is not a tradition. It is a tradition and it should remain. I mean, some people do that religiously, and I do it. I can say, we have our movie night and dinner and all that, and it keeps things going. When we travel, believe it or not, I can tell you this: my wife and I, when we go on trips, they think we just got married. And then we're 21 years, in this. And, really, yes. And it's not because of anything. It's because we try to do that together and enjoy. And we have a lot of similarities. We do see things together. We love fitness, we love things, we love to travel. And that's some of the things. And so I think couples in general have to find, someone that's compatible to start with. I think one of the issues that I see happening is that people are not getting together for the right reasons, I guess. I think it gets, you meet someone, it looks good, and it's nice for the beginning, but that's about it. There's no real, I guess, meat to it.
Yeah.
And the rest is really fluff, and it gets really done before it starts.
Yeah. So in sharing about your relationship, you're letting us know what goes right. You do the date night, you go on trips, and you look like a newly married couple. And that's actually why we looked at couples who were thriving, because in this cohort of people, more than 50% had divorced. Okay, so we decided to look at the people who were together to see what they were doing right. Because when you look at people who have broken apart, they have the same sort of stories. The arguing, and you know what? People who stay together, they argue too.
Yes, as
right?
we found.
Yeah, we
Sometimes
found.
right through the interviews, they argued. That was interesting.
In fact, let's talk about
Couples
arguing.
therapy.
Let's talk
Well,
about
it
arguing.
almost became that way in the interviews because we did 90 interviews worldwide.
Yeah, because there's this perception out there that if you argue, there's something wrong in your relationship. But that's actually not what we found. What we found about arguing.
Yeah. And I actually thought with that generation that, it was a no arguing. But yeah, so 10% of the couples argued regularly and still did. And as I said, 3 couples argued right the way through the interviews. And these were couples that had been married 50, 60, even 70 years. Okay.
Nice.
So, the longest married couple was married from Bulgaria, actually, 73 years, which is such a privilege to interview them. He was 100.
Wow, God bless.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so that's 10% argued regularly, and a 10% never argued, not one argument in their whole marriage. And then that everyone sort of else was in between. But 84% of the couples said that they actually argued.
Yeah, and I just got to emphasize that, because the take-home message is there's no right or wrong rule.
Yeah.
There's no rule that says arguing is good or bad. There's no rule that says that you've got to not argue. It works differently for different people. And that was actually one of the big take-home messages, that if you want your relationship to last, be yourself and find a way to work it yourself.
Well, listen, by the way, I want to, just a disclaimer. We do argue. Just for those people that are just watching right now, it's not always peachy, folks. And and I agree that there are times where we don't see eye to eye. We don't have the same decision or whatever we are trying to plan. Maybe we have a difference of opinion, and we agree to disagree sometimes. But that's part of it. It's the idea is like, well, when to also give up or give in. Those are some tools that I use. We heard the expression "happy wife, happy life." I think the other way works as well. but that's the whole concept. Sometimes you gotta give in and okay, whatever. Maybe next time. You don't always win. That's the other thing. I think when we have that, it's all about me, and I always have to have the upper. The final decision or the final word. It becomes a problem. I think that's really sometimes where it gets very hairy.
Yeah, very, very much so. Actually, it's interesting because all of the couples had different techniques, and we took some of their techniques and put them in the book, combined with Christian's 20 years of psychiatry experience to form techniques for couple therapists to use. But there was a lovely couple from Zimbabwe. They were dancers, both of them, and professional dancers, and they still practice, and they're 60 years married, Bruce and Susan, and they said that what they do when they dance is they have to dance each other's steps to learn the techniques correctly, and that they use that in their arguing too. So they stop and they say, okay, what's your point of view? And started seeing it from the other person's point of view, and they actually dance each other's arguments, I guess, or point of views. And so that became one of the techniques that we use.
Yeah. So that arguing isn't two people against each other, but it's a emotionally charged conversation to show that you're passionate about something, but you also want to understand the other person's point of view.
So I just had literally a show about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and it was similar in a discussion about relationships. And part of the discussion was about operating as a business entity, as a couple. Is that even a thing? Because the way, and I liked some of the stuff that we had in that discussion is because we had the concept of you cannot do 50-50 because that's the thing. It's really 100%.
Yeah.
So did you find, by the way, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned different couples from different parts of the world and definitely different cultures.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the concept of meeting in the middle, or like having like a full concept of 100% or beyond. And then also talking about the diversity in cultures, and does that also have a difference in the relationship? Because sometimes maybe culturally or religiously, there is some rules that people apply versus in some more open, I guess, cultures where there is none of those restrictions or taboos.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the idea of being a team. All right, so teamwork came in at number 9 of our top 17 things to bring people together.
Teamwork.
But the idea of teamwork is a little bit different than in a business, because in a business, the aim is to make money and to keep the business going. So in a relationship, the idea is to keep the relationship going, because you both win if the relationship keeps going, but you both lose if it falls down. So the idea is, how can we make sure that we're doing things to take care of the relationship? And I suppose it's a bit like saying taking care of the business itself. But the dynamic is a lot more caring. There's that feeling of what's called attachment underneath. So that when you're together with somebody for such a long time, you actually are attached to them in such a deep way that you can't even express. And as a couple therapist, what I found is rarely do people split because they don't love each other anymore. What actually happens is they love each other, but they've gone through so many problems and there's been so much hurt that they don't know how to get past all of that. But the love, it's still there.
Yeah, and that's one of the many couples said that the adversity that they went through strengthens the commitment or strengthens the love. So many of them actually said that.
Okay, now I've got to actually go on that point, because that's actually a very important one, because when you have a relationship that goes for a certain amount of time and then you get problems and you want to fall apart, some of the couples told us that, no, that's when you want to keep going, because that's when you're going to get to the goal. That's when you're going to find out that you can actually rely on each other, and that there's a much deeper relationship there and attachment than you actually realize. And it's only going through the hard stuff that you go, wow, you're actually on my side.
And one of the couples actually said that they believe that the younger couples are being shortchanged because they're not going through the hard bits. They leave when it gets hard. They're not going through the hard bits to get to the gold at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of sums up the number one thing that people said.
Number one secret, which
Yeah,
we
we
still hadn't told
We
you.
haven't told you. And I sort of thought that there might be a few people hanging out there, so I thought I'd get back to it.
Yeah.
But the number one secret was?
Commitment. It is commitment.
Now, but we've got to say what commitment is, because it sounds like, okay, commitment is saying that we're going to stay together forever, okay? But commitment is not a one-off I do sometime in the past. That's not commitment. Commitment is showing that you are available on a day-to-day basis, that I'm going to be there with you, I'm available to you, and you can communicate with me anytime you want. So commitment's a daily thing, not just a one-off in the past.
It's the real presence. I mean,
It's
you're,
the real
you're in
presence.
for the duration.
Yes.
Well, that's right.
I mean, but isn't that what the vows are about? You know, and everybody's committing to those words. You know, I mean, first they're words. I mean, it's really action speaks louder than words. So
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you get in there. But that's the thing. Adversity happens,
Yeah.
and are they willing to continue through those?
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
really the big divider in terms of whether someone can make it, or sometimes they just like, this is, as you said, they get to a point it's just too much, and the love is there, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's the question now. Love.
Yeah.
How important is that? I mean, I know it sounds
Okay.
very important
Okay.
because a lot of, I guess when someone is new and they really enjoy that their partners, they're so excited about it. That's what we refer to as love.
Yeah.
But is that really what it is? From a psychiatry perspective.
Okay, so love was secret ingredient number 7, all right?
Wow.
But
Yeah,
here's
wasn't-
but we had to go into a definition of what love actually is. And quite frankly, scientifically, we've got ideas, all right? And this brings up your idea of culture, because love actually looks different in different cultures. Love expressed in Japan is very different to love expressed in New York City, which is very different to love expressed in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
But underlying love is this idea of attachment, that at a very biological level, we need each other, that we feel each other's presence, and that we naturally want to bond with people who are close to each other. So how that gets expressed in each different culture is a cultural thing. But that underlying attachment is this bond that happens simply because we are social creatures, we need each other, and we want to be with each other. And here's the thing, we want to be with each other even if it hurts.
That's where it's difficult.
That's difficult.
People don't want to get, pain, and I think that's when
Yeah.
it gets.
That's the whole thing.
But then doctors, there's the concept of selecting the right partner.
Yes.
Now, you don't know who that partner is. Sometimes that's a big challenge, right? I mean, you meet someone. Sometimes people hide who
Yep,
they really
that's
are
right.
until it's too late.
Too late.
And maybe now you have kids or whatever, and then the true nature of whatever person comes on. What did you find in terms of the I guess the studies?
Okay, so what we studied was what happened when people were together. So in other words, given that people had already found each other, that we wanted to see what went right in the relationships that continued rather than what went wrong, or was it down to partner selection? Because partner selection is what we spend a lot of time on these days, but what really happens is in the long term, what keeps it together. And so we're talking about commitment, we're talking about the hard times, and that brings us to our number 2.
It does. Yes.
Our number 2 secret ingredient.
Yeah, and this is a really novel finding. So we've obviously done a literature review of studies in the past 100 years to see what they came up with. But in no study did this particular aspect come up. So it's something maybe part of the 21st century zeitgeist for this generation. So the number 2 secret for longevity in in long-term relationships is altruism. So do you want to explain altruism?
Altruism, selflessness, the ability to be able to give to somebody else. And altruism basically preserves the relationship. We actually are selfish, and we've got to be selfish to preserve our individuality, right? Otherwise, you don't have the individuals in a relationship. But without altruism, you don't have a relationship. And altruism actually exists abundantly in the natural world. We talk about survival of the fittest, and we look at the kangaroo that will survive, or we look at the zebra that doesn't survive and all of that. But without the parenting of male emperor penguins that will sit on an egg for months, or a lion cub that will go out and hunt, or without a gorilla that will protect his whole troop, that's all altruism, laying yourself on the line for the better of the people around you. And we need some of that. And see, the nice thing about this is the latest neuroscience shows that to be able to have a relationship last, you have to be what they call a mensch. So in other words, a person who is able to give as well as take. And so the science is starting to say that, and our study confirms it, that there's a bit of giving to be done as well, right? Bit of giving, bit of sacrifice, bit of heartache. And some of the people that you interviewed went through some really hard times.
They did. We had one couple. Well, actually, we asked them what was the thing that threatened to tear their relationship apart the most. And so we had couples that, and it was, some of the interviews were incredibly emotional. So there was crying. There was a Vietnam vet that had to come in the room and check the room before he sat down for the interview, that there weren't any enemies there. There were people that shared the deaths of their children with us, and severe disabilities, children with severe intellectual disabilities. For their whole life, they've had to deal with things. There were affairs that were shared during the interviews. There were the number 3 threat was severe mental illness in one couple, one spouse in the couple. It really was a privilege for me to hear those stories, to travel and journey with them. There was hugs, there was tears, there was pats on the shoulder, and some people, even with affairs, said, we've never really spoken about this before, but we think it's important because we got through it, and we want to share that with younger couples, that you can do it, you can get through.
And the sacrifice that it takes to get through things like that.
Yeah.
That's altruism. That's being able to say, okay, I've got to put myself on the back burner. I've got to be here for somebody else. I've got to get through this difficult time because we're stronger together as long as we stay together.
Yeah, that was a couple quote. We're stronger together.
Well, it's funny. We are in Brooklyn, and I think the motto of Brooklyn is in unity there's strength. I think Grand Emery Plaza has a big sign on it.
I love it.
So it is like almost a unique piece that we're talking about here. But it still relates back to that same commitment, because in order for when you commit, you're going to commit that you're going to sacrifice. You're going to be able to take the punches, and you're going to have to stand by a person no matter what. In every circumstances. And unfortunately, today, there are some people that go into it, but that commitment is really not sure. It's just not in the clear. I mean, it just, okay. Yeah. They say it's a word, but it's really not a word. It's an action, right? You can't just say I'm committed without proving that you're committed.
Yeah.
And so in your travels, and first of all, I'm hearing you, and I know these things. I don't know how you do it, because you are listening to these people, and you're really into their mind, literally, because this is like, their feelings, their minds.
Yeah.
And it's powerful stuff.
It was.
It's listen, I mean, kudos, and, the work you do is important, and you are literally making a difference in terms of how people observe their relationships and really even preserve them, I would say. Now, when you met with some of these folks, and in the case of, let's say, affairs, that's a very dangerous, realm. I mean, that's probably one of the worst. I mean, everybody's afraid of that. And how come these folks were able to still maintain? Because what we know, typically, you cannot take someone if they actually had an affair and cheated. At least that's the standard that we hear all the time. From your perspective, how does that work?
As far as the affairs are concerned?
Yes.
Okay. Well, do you
Yeah,
want to
I think I'll let you
explain
take
a
that
little bit more?
because
Yeah.
previous to our study, actually, most of the work has been done on studying people who have fallen apart. And the number one reason that relationships fall apart is affairs. And so because of that, we tend to think that if you have an affair, that means you can't stay together. But Caroline interviewed the couples that stayed together, even within an affair. And so what we were interested in is, how did you do that? And there are a number of things. Firstly, forgiveness becomes important. Okay. But then also growing together. And we had one couple that actually told us that they are closer together after the affair, but also working through it. Not that I'm telling people to go out and have affairs to get closer, all right? But you sort of go, oh, man, what is it about our relationship that somebody had an affair, right? So you go back into the relationship and you say, okay, maybe our relationship needed this or needed that. And then you actually commit to sacrificing so that the relationship gets that. And you actually get into a spot where the relationship can be better. And that's why we looked at the couples that made it rather than the ones that fall apart. Because if you look at the ones that fall apart, it's sort of like an affair, there's no way you can come back from that. But a lot of these couples could.
Yes, there was one couple actually that the affair was quite fresh. It had only happened about 4 months ago, and the revelation of it and everything. And there was crying right the way through that interview. And they said that there was a lot of forgiveness, and it was still very fresh and raw, and there was so much hurt there. But in the end, they said, look, they realised that one of them would be on one island and one would be on another island, and they'd be alone. And they have a history that they have built up that they wouldn't be able to start again. And this is where they were at, and this was so fresh and raw. And they said, we'd rather be together because we're actually still best friends. You know, that is still that friendship. It's all of that they've invested in their relationship to keep together.
Yeah, and I want to take that story to move on to resilience, right? Because resilience is a word that is difficult to understand, but a lot of, like that couple, they had to fight. They had to fight for their relationship. There was a time that they did not like each other, all right, that things went wrong, but they said, no, we have to fight. And that idea of fighting, because they said, we've built up 42 years together, so we're not just going to walk away from that. And that fight is actually resilience, to be able to go through something that's difficult, even though you're hurting, and come out the other end and say, I have grown as a person through that. And in a relationship, we as a couple have grown together through that so that we are more resilient than we used to be.
Yeah, and actually a really good quote from one of the couples was, this was a couple from Estonia, and they'd been married over 60 years. And they argued a lot too, and they had quite a few little tips in front of me. There's a wonderful, the actual Estonian word for marriage is appilu, which means work and life. So they go into a marriage going, okay, it's life, but it's also work. You know, so it's still and helping each other.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, that was the other part. Work, life, and help. So helping each other. And that goes back to altruism too. Yeah.
So Doctor, I want to go back to one thing. You addressed the how to get over an affair, but why people get into an affair? I mean, is there a common root cause of why people actually? I mean, you love someone, you're with them, but suddenly, you find a desire to actually, go outside of that commitment. Is there any findings on that?
So our study didn't look at the findings as to why somebody would have an affair. And I discussed that there'd be something in the relationship missing for somebody to feel that they would need to do that. But the way I look at it, Hurricane, is it's a game. So before you get married, or before you say, yes, I am staying with you for the rest of my life, you're playing one game. And the game is, who do I find that I can have the best relationship with, that I want to commit myself to? But once you're committed, you start playing a different game. The game is, okay, this is my person. And the game becomes, what can we do to have a great life together? What can we do to have the best relationship that we can have? And here's something about our society, all right? Our society keeps us focused on the first game, because we will part with our money if we think there's something wrong with our relationship. Okay. Or it just keeps you niggling, maybe there's somebody better out there for you. Okay. Or maybe you just keep looking. But when you go, no, this is my person, and you start playing the other game, then you go, okay, what can we do to make our relationship resilient?
So, Dax, one question. I know you, because first of all, you mentioned so many parts of the world right there. But some of these folks have been married for 60, 70 plus years.
Yeah.
Now, in some cultures, there is a prearranged concept of marriage. And it seems that historically that worked.
Yeah.
As opposed to like we have now all the open culture where you want to select your partner. Yet it tends to have more devastating or disastrous endings compared to the ones that were, even though like you think that an arranged marriage is not really compatible because you don't know who you're with, you can almost work it out through the marriage. So how is that, possible that in a prearranged marriage, they tended, well, at least the tradition was they tended to stay longer and commit to until death. And today that we have the ability to select, we still make mistakes and sometimes deselect.
Yeah. And I suppose this highlights one of the aspects about our relationship is not looking at how to select a partner. It looks at what happens after you've selected a partner and what you can do to keep it together.
Our relationship study is doing
Our
that.
relationship study is doing that. That's right. So our relationship study is doing that. And so if a relationship was prearranged or if it was a love match, it's still the same things that are needed to keep it together. Commitment, altruism, shared values, good communication, give and take, all of those sort of things are needed no matter how you got together. They're the stuff that you need to make the relationship resilient.
Go into the ingredients.
Yeah. So there we go. So we've got commitment, number one, and then we've got altruism, number two. And number three is shared values.
Shared values.
And that's quite a novel finding too, actually, because a lot of the couples said that they forged their values together, or some of them even said, we've got really opposite personalities, but we've got the same values, and that was their glue. And really, Christian and I have opposite personalities in so many ways, but shared values is our glue in many ways too. Yeah. So keeping those values, because they're the things that's the river that's underneath that keeps people going.
Yeah, and you asked about different cultures. And so we had quite a few couples that were cross-cultural marriages. Yes. And
that's always interesting.
Yeah. And it does become more difficult, right? It's like you're in the Olympic Games. If you're doing the double synchronized dive, you get more points if you do a more difficult dive. So people who are in cross-cultural relationships perhaps are doing a more difficult dive. But it is actually shared values that becomes the glue in the relationship for a lot of cross-cultural marriages and relationships.
That's a difficult one, but certainly when you accept the concept that you are marrying into a different culture or you already accepting that fact. So therefore you're willing to make the leap. And sometimes you find the two parties almost learning about the other culture to actually make it work. And again, it's that commitment to make it work, and you do whatever it's necessary to do it.
Yeah.
But to your point, that's more difficult. Yet the results are they're good. They're working.
Yeah,
they
are. And what you articulated just there, Hurricane, sort of encapsulates the difference. If you marry somebody that's in your street, okay, the values are going to be so much the same that you don't have as many challenges. All right, so maybe there's more harmony there. But if you marry somebody that's from halfway across the world, you may have to learn a new language. You may have to learn new customs.
Food.
But the result is something quite enriching. Right. And so you can sort of say, oh, wow, wonderful result. But a lot of work goes into it.
That also goes, you can extrapolate that into opposite personalities too, because there's such a big difference there. And interestingly, that was one of the glues, opposite personalities. I don't remember, it was like 12 or something.
No, it was number 15.
But that was, they were actually saying that was a strength in their relationship, because they had to work harder, yes, but they went deeper and they learned so much. Their lives were really enriched by that. And because the book actually cites over 900 scientific studies in it too. And some of the studies, the most recent studies coming out, are saying that opposite personalities are actually quite good and can actually strengthen commitment
Well,
too.
it's the yin and yang, right? You got to complement each other.
Yeah, but
that always works.
That's right. But if you look at the couples that divorce, then a lot of couples will say, "Oh, we divorced because we have incompatible personalities, because we were too different," and that's why we did our study on the couples that stayed together. And we had couples saying, "Yep, we're together because we're opposite personalities, and we learn from each other, and we can use this person's strengths and that person's strengths." So it's not a rule that this is what you have to have or this is what you don't have. Choice becomes really important.
I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because, I thought about my wife. Whenever we're together, I'm the mouthpiece. She puts me to talk. So that's my strength.
That's right. Yeah.
So everybody's got their own way. But identifying those differences,
Yeah.
I think that can make a difference. But so a question that I'm not sure if it was found in your studies and definitely in the book. Now, relationships, two people are great. They can make it work. But then sometimes you have influences from their families.
Oh.
Or their best friends. I mean, I think a lot of it is like if you listen to the voices, right? That's usually sometimes you can have a great, what are you doing with her? What are you doing with him?
Yeah.
And then all the parents, getting involved in the decisions.
Yep.
Now you have kids. Everybody wants to actually raise the kids with you.
Yeah.
So what was the finding in terms of those elements I just mentioned?
Okay, so this is actually a good time to mention that the study was put into context of pressures. So the pressures of today is hyper-individualism, mental illness, but also social isolation. And there are a lot of families that, because of conflict within the family, like, I don't like the person that you married, I don't like the person that you're with at the moment, they see less of each other. And so we're getting a lot more isolated. And what the science shows is that we're actually very susceptible to what people around us think. So if you have a parent or a sibling that doesn't agree with your love choice, that's going to be a pressure. It's going to be a big pressure. And you need to...
Well, we...
You're laughing about that one.
I know. We have it too. But it was really extreme in some cases because in-law interference was number 5 threat to the relationship. So we actually had one couple where the father and the father-in-law threatened to lie down on the runway if this couple moved overseas away from their home to stop them going. There was there was so much pressure in some of the couples. One couple, actually, Olga and Raul from Paraguay, there was 120 people invited to the wedding. 28 showed up because they didn't like the wife that the husband was marrying. So, and they're still waiting for this couple to divorce. So there is so much pressure in certain couples from in-laws. It was just really mind-blowing to hear the pressure that they were under. But what they did is, it was the you and me against the world sort of attitude that they took.
That's right. See,
you and me against the world.
And this is the resilient relationship.
Yeah.
They said, no, they're not going to break us. We're
Yeah.
going to stay together. We're going to work as a team. And they did. And so they're still together after 50 years, Hurricane.
Well, I mean, I want to, it's a true story. My parents, they did not want my mother's family, my father's family, they didn't want my mother. And for years, they were literally a little bit not happy about that, but they still married about 50 plus years. So,
Yep.
Great.
But it was
Congratulations.
a challenge in the beginning.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, it was always like, them versus them and, us. And as a kid, you're in between. I think that's another thing that sometimes you have children. They're also like almost like ripped apart between, those currents, and everybody's pulling their way, and it's difficult. So financials, was that, any level where the financials are kind of very drastic for people's relationships?
Well, that's really interesting. It was one of the threats, but it was very low. It was like number 10 or something,
Really?
It really didn't impact. I think that was a generational thing too.
Okay.
But I mean, some of them had extreme poverty. coming to a new country. So some of them obviously were immigrants, and some of them still were very, very poor. But they really clung together through it. What's interesting, because we did ask some questions, who manages the finances and everything, and it was quite often the women that managed the finances in the households. But again, there's a generational difference there because the attitude to finances has changed quite a bit. Yeah. And I think that would have been something that some of the younger couples ask that question, what about finances? How much pressure does that put on your relationship and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, doctors, have you found in the study where someone bails on the other party because they're no longer fit physically, I would say?
Somebody, what?
Fit physically, or they're no longer attracted to them, whether through their sexual life or personal life, or just they're not attracted to them anymore.
Yeah. Well, again, we saw the couples that were still together, that still sort of made it. Okay, so it means that they would have found some way to stay attracted.
It didn't matter for them.
No, in fact, the attraction was actually, well, because we were talking to the people who'd made it, right? What was it? 84% of the couples were still sexually
active, yes. But they have a different perspective of romance,
Yes.
Because I did ask them the romance question, and it for so many of the women was like, I hate having flowers; they just die, Don't do that, Let's just go and watch a sunset together. That's the most romantic thing for me, or that he always, makes me a cup of tea when I want it. He knows me, and it was lovely because, or he finishes my sentences. I had couples that one had been away in a war situation, and she had 120 handwritten letters, and she said she wanted to be buried with them. So there were some beautiful romance stories of what romance was for them, but a lot wasn't to do with appearances. As much, obviously, in this cohort. Actually, some of the things were just comfort, just being there, just being comfortable to be with each other and not say anything for hours, just being in the same room, reading together, or just eating, but not having to say anything, not having to feel that gap of silence. So, yeah.
Well, you were talking about cruising earlier, and in the cruise ship, I see a lot of that. You got couples, they're just relaxing, everybody's got their book, and they're just enjoying, they do their own thing. That's the other thing, the ability to be flexible.
Yeah.
Because there are, again, some people are possessive. Like you want to do everything together, and sometimes that becomes overwhelming. Yeah. I mean, was there a finding about that in terms of where a little bit of breathing, is necessary?
Yeah. So one of the top ingredients was actually the ability to tolerate, be patient, and to forgive the other person. So when we talk about forgiveness, we go to things like affairs, but tolerance is something like maybe the two of you go at a different pace. That one person is used to going fast and somebody just likes to take things a bit slowly, or somebody likes to plan everything and somebody likes to be just a bit more spontaneous. And all of these little differences that you experience on a day-to-day basis, that actually needs tolerance, just the ability to be able to just leave it there without resolving it.
Yeah, and separate time and interest was an important thing
Yes,
for
it
some
was,
couples, and other couples did absolutely everything together. So as you were saying, Christian, it's so different for each couple.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, one or the other, basically. You know.
So one of the implications of our study actually is that rather than having rules saying this is what couples must do for a relationship to work, that couples therapists take the time to sit down with their couple and say, okay, how does your relationship work? What do you guys do that works well? Where have you found solutions to problems? Because every relationship, and I've found this in my own practice, works differently. And people know how to handle each other, and you actually become an expert in handling the person that you're with. Because you know them better than anybody else, and they know you better than anybody else. So you find a way of making that work. But sometimes people can end up in patterns that just don't work terribly well. And that's the place for a therapist to sort of say, okay, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not that there's not love there, it's just that you're in this pattern. And if we can get rid of that pattern, then perhaps the love will flow a bit more easily.
Yeah, it was interesting when you were saying there's this and there's that, and I talked about the couples that finish each other's sentences, but then there's the couples that argue all the time,
Yes.
and they're in a different kind of a holding pattern with that, but it still works. So I had one that was a Republican and one that was a Democrat, and they're still married after, I think it's 45 or 46 years now, and yeah, they were one of the couples that argued all the way through the interview. Actually, she was from Israel and he was American, and it was so fascinating to watch. But there was so much love underneath,
Yes.
and there was even respect of each other's perspectives. They didn't agree with each other, and couldn't believe that they thought these things. But they said, well, why would I go? You know, why would I leave her? Why would I leave him? You know, we have so much in common. This is our language. We speak this way to each other. This is our form of communication, and it works. It worked for them, and they brought up 3 wonderful children, and yeah.
So the book itself is for, I guess, therapists to help primarily, but it could also be for individuals to actually really get the values from the experiences and the interviews
Yes.
and all these nuggets that you discovered. I mean, they're really tools to help people get better. Now, someone who's seeking therapy, there's a good chance they're having a tough time.
Yeah.
And so they'll come in with really like a bad situation. And the role of a therapist is really to diminish that. And as they walk up from there, and we see it in movies, we see it in general, you know, like they go through the couple sessions and then all of a sudden, like, you know, they're happy. And then at least they get enough tools to get restarted.
Yeah.
And maybe remove some of the obstacles and the challenges that they had.
Yeah.
Now, in the book, you have all these stories, I believe stories, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the stories, and then you also have the different, steps.
Yeah.
All right. Now, someone can literally use that just by itself.
Yes.
Or do you need
Absolutely.
someone to be with you to actually guide you through this?
No, you can. You can read this book and know that there are steps that you can take to preserve your relationship. In fact, one of the main points that the book makes is that sometimes it's not, well, actually, most of the time, it's not one person's fault or the other person's fault. We live in a society that is moving against relationships at the moment. There's a nature of our society. So, in other words, the way that we live is making us more isolated, it's giving us more mental health problems, and it's making us think about ourselves first. So in other words, a couple, rather than blame each other, could actually form a team and say, you know what, this is a strange society that we're in. I mean, it's wonderful in a lot of ways, but it's got a few drawbacks. So if we become a team, we could actually make it. And all of that is in this book.
That's like the Bible for relationships. Yeah. But really, I mean, you're right. I mean, the team concept is everything.
Yeah.
You cannot go into a relationship and expect that one is going to be the leader and the other one's the follower. I mean, I think that's really what destroys those relationships. The minute there's one that is overlapping, I think that's where it becomes disastrous. It has to be an equal balance.
Okay, and so that brings us to the hyper-individualism of today's age, where we have to look out for, number one, ourselves first. And that's what ends up in a power struggle. But the relationships that make it get this attitude of you and me against the world. If we can be a team, sure, you're going to have your little power struggles within the team, but by and largely, if you're there supporting each other and you want the other to do as well as you do, then it's going to be you and me against the world, and you can win.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Teamwork makes the dream work. Yeah.
I mean, you can't go wrong with that. I mean, and there's reasons for that. I mean, especially, you got young couples that may not have kids, but then you have also kids that come into a relationship. You become a bigger team.
Oh, yes.
And now
and standing on the same side too, which a lot of the couples emphasised. Standing on the same side with their values, that's why shared values was number 3, so that when they're a united front in front of the children, so it's not this pull, this back and forth. So it's very, very important.
So true story.
Yeah.
Again, I always try to give some reference, but my kids, they know this. They cannot go to mom and expect her to have a different outcome or different response.
So good.
They go to her, they know like she's gonna tell me, I'm gonna tell her. There's no like, dad said, mom said. No, you tell me it's the same thing. You tell her it's the same thing. It's not gonna work that way, because sometimes they try to do that. So for those couples that have kids, that's a game kids play, but it wouldn't work if you have that sync, mentality, and you're really working as a unit, and it makes a difference. And then the kids know that. So this is our official book launch in the States.
Yes,
right?
it is.
This is officially, we're coming to the end of the show, but this is really officially the launch of Resilient Relationships, the book, in the States. Now, doctors have been literally around the world promoting the book already. And so this is a big place. And I think in the U.S. we have a need for this. I'm sorry, but I think we hear a lot of stories about relationships and the lack of, I guess, working, and divorces is at a high, a peak, I would say. Maybe it's more than most of the other nations. I don't know.
In the States, yes, it is.
It is, yes. So just want to confirm. And that's really, because of all the... see, we talked about everything that's working in relationships. So if you look just at that, that's really what we need to worry about. You just have to focus on those elements. The book's going to give you every single reason why you could make it, despite all the challenges, because, it addressing all the challenges that these couples faced, yet they still made it. And again, now, obviously, people have a choice. If you're in a relationship that is completely suffocating, that's a different story.
Yeah.
There are, I guess, reasons why sometimes you cannot proceed in a relationship. But for the most part, if you have the right partner, it's worth making it work.
Yep.
We say it's the most selfish thing you can do to be in a long-term relationship.
There it is.
Yeah, and to take care of it.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a long-term relationship, this is what the science says, you've got better physical health, you've got a better emotional health, you've got better relational health. It protects you against unhappiness, against depression, against anxiety, against addictions, and mainly against suicide, particularly for men.
Ooh.
So there's not a pill that can do all of this for you. But it's a lot of work, all right?
Well,
It takes a bit of effort.
Yeah, it does.
a lot of effort. But
Yeah.
doctors, you mentioned suicide.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. We can spend another hour on that one. But so we have a few minutes. How close suicide is to relationships? The relevance of it or the challenge of it, it's real.
Yes, it's very real, particularly for men. Men who are divorced or single are at 6 times the rate of suicide risk than a married male. 6 times, so that's huge.
Yeah.
For women, it's not that big, but the thing is that together we're stronger. In fact, we're in a relationship where we're now getting red pill cultures and black pill cultures, which are basically a very nihilistic approach to life because people can't find relationships. And one of the things that grieves me as a psychiatrist is that people are missing the point of relationships and are not seeing their lives progress forward because they can't see themselves in these long-term relationships. And Hurricane, this is one of the reasons that we wrote this book, because we are the end of a generation that kind of knew how to do relationships, or there were a lot of people who did.
Yeah, most definitely.
And we wanted to capture how they did it, what it was. Now, I know that not every relationship's going to make it, and I know that not everybody wants a long-term relationship, but our study shows that overwhelmingly, young people do want their relationships to last. And so if that's what you want and you want to choose it, these are the ways to do it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
we have.
Definitely. So folks, there will be a link to where the book is available, and there's also a discount code for that.
Yeah.
So please do check out my links, and hopefully you'll be able to get your copy. I personally recommend it. I think it's there for a reason, and they did a lot of work to help people. If you think that there's a need for it, or you know someone who needs it, I think that's just as appropriate. It could be a good gift. Right. You never know who needs it, and it's going to make a difference. And probably they're going to thank you for it. So any last, words of wisdom today, in this particular show?
There are a lot of people who have had long-term relationships that would like their children and their grandchildren to have long-term relationships as well. Don't blame each other. We're in a culture that's working against relationships. But as Caroline said, the most selfish thing that two people can do is take care of their long-term relationship. Caroline?
That's it. I think that's the one. It's tough. Some of the couples I interviewed told me they'd been to hell and back again, but they made it. They committed to each other and they stuck at it. Stickability.
Yes, stickability. If
I
you're
like
going
that.
through hell, keep going. 'Cause
The
you don't wanna
gold is
stay
there,
That's
and the
right.
gold is there, and you go through the tough bits, and it actually makes you stronger together.
Yeah.
Quick question. How long have you been together?
You know the maths. I'm useless at this. I've forgotten. 30-something.
Okay, we're coming up to 33 years.
There we go. 33. I
There
should
you
do
go,
it.
folks. I mean, here's an example, right? It's working. It works. And I'm sure it's not always peachy, but they
No.
make it work.
We make it work.
We make it work.
All right. Well, so doctors, it's a true honor, a pleasure as always. This is more than I begged for. I mean, I'm so excited about having you here in person. I do want to give a shout out to our studio here. This is Brooklyn Podcasting Studio with Josh, behind the scenes doing the magic. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. And
yeah.
Hurricane, thank you very much. It's just been a pleasure working with you in person for the first time in 2.5 years. And
Yeah.
it's wonderful for us to be.
Yeah.
I think we got to do more. Maybe next time I'll go to the land down under.
You can come to
That's right.
Australia
That
and
would be
visit
nice.
us. That's right. Lovely.
All right, folks. Well, this is the end of the show. Hope you've enjoyed it. There's a lot of good stuff here. Definitely, again, it is a book launch, and we want to get this in front of you as much as possible. As many of you that can take advantage of this, please do. And that's it. So I'm Hurricane H. We'll be talking to doctors, I would say, in the next month. Usually it's the end of the last Friday of every month. That's where we did the show. They'll be back home, and then we'll resume our standard show. Bye for now.
Wow.